So do y'all remember that cool Jay-Z ad from a few years ago when he was recreating all of his album covers? And, I thought that might be a good idea. Let me try to recreate the recreation. And, yeah, that didn't really work out as well as I thought. Before I Memphis Bleak up some more stuff, D Roth, let's get it going. Welcome back, y'all, to another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions right here on YouTube. Your boy's back with you again. Thought I retired like Jay-Z, but I came out of retirement. You see what I did there? Because today is all about celebrating the long career of one of hip-hop's biggest legends, Jay-Z himself. Listen, no matter what you think about the man, and most of us listening and watching this video probably know his accolades, know where he's came from. I think that a lot of times, though, sometimes we don't give the man enough credit for what he's done. I know that sounds crazy to some, but hear me out. Jay-Z was an artist who went from your basic nice lyricist around 1996 to an actual superstar, to a hip-hop mogul, to arguably one of the most influential pop culture icons, not just artists, pop culture icons in current day. He's as aspirational as you can get. And where there are a lot of artists in hip hop and across the board with a lot of fake accolades, I mean, Jay has the numbers and the actual classics to build that up. Regardless what you think of him, regardless of even my personal criticisms about some of the inconsistencies throughout his career, one thing is for sure: he has been the driving force of hip-hop for about 30 years now. When you look at that type of longevity in a genre as crazy as this one is, where longevity is something that's not really guaranteed, to have that type of legacy for this long is worth knowing. You can't hate on Hov's success. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through his entire career, ranking them albums from bottom to top. You know how we do. And there's a reason why on pretty much every credible hip-hop personalities list, he's going to be in the top 5. You'll see why today. Unless I guess you were born in like 2011 and then you probably think Lil Baby's in the top 5. But babies support babies. But before we get started, thought I was going to forget. Don't forget to hit like. Don't forget to hit share. Don't forget to subscribe to your homie. And when this video is over, do your part and share that video with your friends and your fam. Really means a lot, for real, for real. The more likes, the more follows, the more subscribers, the more encouragement I get to get this content out. Plus, we can get the truth out to the masses. So somebody got to tell the truth out here. So, a reminder before we get started today, just keep this in mind. As with all rankings, we will not be doing any collabo albums. We won't be doing any compilation albums. Well, Jay does have a few collabos that will slide on the list, so forget that. We'll do a few of those just to keep y'all happy. Just a few surprises sprinkled in. But for those looking for like the Unplugged album or the Collision Course album, we ain't gonna do those. It's hard to kind of rank albums that have songs that are on other albums. It just gets kind of weird and murky. So let's get started and see why Jay is among the best sellers. Coming in at number 17, Unfinished Business. Remember how I said that we weren't going to do collabos? This album makes me feel like I shouldn't have done a collabo. Jay-Z and R. Kelly. I'm going to keep this one short. Most of y'all know the story. This is the second attempt that these two brothers had at doing their little collab thing. And it didn't work the first time due to criminal issues. So they wanted to try it again, and it was even worse this time. The first album was no prize, but this felt like scraps of scraps. And it just could not work. It had no business being put out at all at this point. I get it from a business perspective. They had this big tour plan. Jay-Z and R. Kelly were a big group. Well, they were a couple of big artists, and putting them together made for this big giant celebration of music. This was their opportunity to take it to the next level, and they were just trying to capitalize on it since it fell through the first time. Let the sleeping dogs lie. No way we should have went through it with a second time. This album is an absolute mess. Maybe a song here or there that could be something that's salvageable, but overall should be skipped for reasons that you probably already know. Let's just leave that alone. Coming in at number 16, Best of Both Worlds 1. Yes, I gotta talk about the Prince of Darkness once again. Look, I'm not gonna get back and forth with y'all on the R. Kelly thing because I know that there are some fans that are screaming in my mentions now that, oh, I'm so unfair. We don't talk about that here, but what we will talk about is the quality of the album. And when you have two artists, the quality of, say what you will about R. Kelly, he is one of the greatest R&B artists of all time. You can't take that away from him. And Jay-Z, one of hip-hop's greatest hit makers. This should have been a no-brainer blow-away album. Instead, this felt like a rushed DJ Clue mixtape. A few good songs here and there, but it sounded like these two got together on a weekend, drunkenly made a few tracks, threw a few features on it, was like, here, give us your tour money. And that's pretty much what this project was. It fell apart due to R. Kelly being disgusting. And then they tried it again, as we talked about earlier, and it was even worse. Let's just leave these two projects in the recycle bin. Y'all ain't missing much. Coming in at number 15 is the Blueprint 3. And this is where I'm sure the children will start coming to my throat. I understand it because I've talked before, as you know, about the magical year that was 2009. The year that we really started to get a new generation of hip-hop fans on social media who were very, very vocal and very passionate about this art form that they had only been embracing a few years. Us old heads, 2009, we've been around for 20 years. We knew what the deal was. So there's a lot of love for this album in certain circles of ye old internet. But for those of us who've been listening to Jay for years and years and years, decades at that point, we were not impressed. This album was very all over the place. Not at all horrible, but very inconsistent and very unlike Jay. There's some great songs on it. I'm sorry, kids. I did like DOA. He didn't kill auto-tune, but the song was hilarious. And there are a few other hits to be sprinkled around, but it was just really unfocused. He did his best to try to bring on some new faces to kind of appeal to that younger demographic, which again worked because it's one that's still celebrated today. But there's a reason why, besides a couple of hits, this one doesn't get any love from any of the album cuts. It's slapdash, kind of all over the place, and not one that's really up to the level of Jay-Z's standards. The kiddos love it, but old heads, we ain't with it. Coming in at number 14 is Rock La Familia, aka the Dynasty album. And this is where the old heads get mad at me. So don't worry, youngins. Everybody stays mad at your boy. The bias goes across the board. Everybody gets to be mad at your boy. That's what it is here at Soul and Stereo. So I'm not sure why this album is so loved. But this was an era for me as a Jay-Z fan where we started to see little cheeks in the armor. After coming off of like 3 or 4 stretches of incredible albums, things started getting kind of rough in the late 90s and into the 2000s. And this album was indicative of that. So overall, I don't even see it as a Jay-Z project. It almost feels like a Dynasty / Rockefeller compilation album. Again, it feels like almost like a mixtape. There are just features all up and down this. And there were rumors that, in fact, this was going to be a compilation project that became a full album. Listen, there are some great songs up here. The Dynasty intro is one of the best intros in hip-hop history and some of Jay-Z's best bars to date overall. I wasn't a fan of the singles, though, y'all. No, was not it. And people still love it today. I know it turns the party up. I'll go stand on the wall. I couldn't do it. And besides that, the guilty till proven innocent, it just was... There are some great songs buried amongst some very, very inconsistent singles. It's another project that's all over the place for me. And while we got to see some of the Jay-Z that we knew at the time, I understand at this point he was branching out a little bit. He was trying to make sure that his sound was very mainstream. He was going to do these things where he was gonna have that radio hit. So I cannot knock the hustle, see what I did there, at all. And I've come around on this album over time. At the time, I despised it. It would be my least favorite Jay-Z album by far. It's gotten up a little bit. I can appreciate a little bit more with age and wisdom. But I think it's one of Jay's worst projects. Sorry about your nostalgia. Coming in at number 13 is Volume 3, Life and Times of Sean Carter. I guess it was S. Carter. Whatever, you know the man. Here's the thing with this album. Remember earlier how I mentioned that this was the era where Jay started to, I wouldn't say fall off, but got a little shaky in his content, so to speak. And it just wasn't him. It was Nas. It was almost all of the big artists of the early 90s and the mid 90s. They started getting a little shaky around the late 90s and into the 2000s as the sounds were starting to shift and people were trying to find new ways to stay relevant. This was one of those albums. This, in fact, was to me the first Jay-Z album that I heard. I was like, I don't love this. What is this? A Jay-Z album I don't love? I just think it's okay. What's going on? You see, we could do that back then. Nowadays, y'all are making excuses for anybody. But back then, you can say to your face, I don't know if I'm feeling this that much old. And that doesn't mean you were a bad fan. It just means that you had high standards. We used to appreciate that stuff back in the day. Can we please bring it back? Anyway, to this album. This album does have some great tracks on it for sure, as every Jay-Z album does. But the problem is, again, another strike with inconsistency. For every great song that's there, and there's a lot of great album cuts here, there's a weirdo song like the song where he's dancing around in the diamond. Come here, baby. No. That's not it. Even some of the Do It Again, the kind of club anthem that Jay tried to come out with, it's fine, but it certainly didn't take things to the next level. This is an album that had a lot of okay on it, and for the artist at Jay-Z's level, okay does feel a little bit like a disappointment. Not at all bad, some great stuff, but really the first album that we heard was like, could have done a little harder on that one, Jay. Could have went a little harder, just a little bit. Coming in at number 12 is the comeback album, Kingdom Come. And I know the placement of this one will probably surprise a few of you because this album has this legacy of being a horrible, terrible disappointment. Let me set the stage for you. So around 2003, 2004, Jay-Z decided to retire, which I never bought. I told y'all he was coming back. Told y'all. There's no way he could stay away. Anyway, this was his return to hip-hop as an artist. And because he had come off of that phenomenal run, his previous album, the Black Album, was so beloved, this return was so hyped, people thought that this was going to be a classic. A classic was going to drop into our lap. Jay-Z was back. And what we got was a decent album. And because the expectations were so high, decent turned into, oh my God, it's trash. It's trash. It's the trash. It's the trash of every trash. Hold on, Oscar. It's not that trash. It's okay. And sometimes it's okay to be okay. Jay returned, and he returned with a little bit more maturity. He had a little bit more focus. He definitely had something to say. He was speaking on social issues. This is something that he very rarely did. He did a little bit on Blueprint 2, but there were things that he really, as an adult, you could see he was growing into his manhood, and he wanted to bring it more, but people were stuck on the nostalgia. They wanted to hear, I just want to love you, and that weirdness, or even back to the Reasonable Doubt days. This was a more mature Jay-Z. He had some things to say, his sound was different, and it wasn't readily acceptable. Again, I encourage you to go back and listen to it today, because with older, wiser ears, it's easy to pick up on some of the themes that he was hitting on, and I see where he was going. It didn't always work, because once again, he's got some album cuts that were clearly meant for mainstream play that just completely go off the rails. No offense to B, my wife gonna come in here and kill me, but that Hollywood song is horrible. There's so many songs here that just feel so out of place. Had no business on the album at all. Should have been left on the cutting room floor. What works, works. Show Me What You Got, I thought was a fun comeback single. But as an overall project, good intentions, just didn't quite stick the landing. But it's not as bad as y'all think. Coming in at number 11, yes, Magna Carta Holy Grail. I'm surprised he didn't call this Magna Carta. I give you props for the restraint and giving it the proper name. I know this is a placement of another one that's going to drive y'all nuts, because boy, people were pissed off about this album in 2013. Remember when Samsung gave y'all a free album and you just went nuts? Well, it wasn't quite free. It wasn't like the U2 album. Here's the thing. Samsung had a kind of a collabo project partnership with Jay, where he had this album, but you had to get the phone and blah, blah, blah. And it was all this weird stuff. There was a lot of weird stuff going on in that era where they're trying to give away free stuff with like the U2 thing and all these things that were just kind of thrown out there to try new marketing schemes with these newfangled technology like a cell phone. Ooh, new technology. So while they were playing these kind of almost digital games, I think that the quality of the album kind of got lost in the sauce. And the album itself, I actually think is pretty okay. I'm sure I'm about to get hit by a lot of digital tomatoes when I say that. But I don't think the album's bad. I think it's actually pretty solid. Here's the problem with this album, though. Not only did it just appear in the most weird way, because getting the album was almost a headache at the time, but it was another album that was a bit overhyped for what we got. I think we were overpromised something. Jay-Z at this point was really, really heavy into his I eat brunch at Paris and buy Picassos and Basquiat and blah, 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 blah. And I know there's a rapper arrogance where everyone brags about their money. This wasn't really it. Jay-Z felt almost detached because he was so living a life that none of us probably will ever experience. It felt like he just was not connecting with the audience in the way that he used to. He wasn't a dude from Marcy anymore. He was the businessman that's just like hanging out on yachts all the time. And whereas we kind of celebrate that because it's aspirational, it also feels like you're talking to your friend from high school who is like turned into a whole different person, and it doesn't quite connect. Along with that, this album just lacked a bunch of hits. However, what is on the album really works to me. I think that there's lots of solid songs. Part 2, the On the Run song, I love that song. Y'all can hate it if you want to. Love that joint. There are many songs here that I think actually do work. And as a project, as a whole, it's good. It just kind of doesn't feel like a Jay-Z album, from sound to content to tone. It just feels weird. He was in a weird place, and you could really tell in the album. And I think that's why it's one that's not really embraced today. Because if you can't relate to the music, it's hard to say that you like it. But from a technical aspect, from what I try to do as a reviewer, I thought it was solid. Definitely on the back end of his catalog. Not a disaster, though. But I can understand why people are like, we not playing this one in the ride. Give me the aux cord back. Coming in at number 10, The Blueprint 2, The Gift and the Curse. And what a name for this album, because it perfectly describes it. So there was this era in hip hop where it felt like everybody had to have a double disc album. It's like, okay, Big did it, Pac did it, so Nas had to do it, Jay had to do it, and Wu had to do it. And it's like you had to feel like you couldn't be a legend until you had your double disc. So everybody did a double disc album. And nobody did it as well as Big and Wu, but that's a combo for another day. Anyway, this album is another album that I did not really appreciate at the time, but I come to appreciate it more now. The first disc, which was, I think, considered the gift disc, at least I call it a gift disc because it was a way better disc, was great. And in fact, the first disc should have just been the album itself. That should have been it. The second disc, which was much longer and had much more disposable club tracks and other weirdness on it. It just felt like a grab bag of random Jay-Z music. And it was like, what is this? I like this one, but what is this? As an overall package, it's hard to rank because there's some greatness there and there's some goofiness on the other side. Putting it together, I do think it's an enjoyable listen. Kind of reminds me a lot of Pac's All Eyes, because it's an album that people really like. And I'm not saying this is at all the level of Pac's album. Not at all. But it's an album that people love, but it's also kind of flawed in a lot of ways that could be easily remedied if you just chopped like 10 of the songs off. Like, we don't need a whole double disc. But what's here is very, very good. And even though weaker songs aren't horrible, there are a few that are some stinkers. But it's a frustrating release because it's an album that could easily be a gift to hip hop, but man, it was cursed in its excess. Coming in at number 9 is the J&B collabo, Everything Is Love. And some of y'all are probably like, man, this is pretty high on the list, but it's actually a really good collaboration, and I think it holds up well. You also have to remember the frame that this came around. This album came after, of course, Beyonce's Lemonade, where people totally missed the point on that one. They just took it as the Jay-Z bashing session. There was a lot of venting going on, but there was also some healing that was trying to go on as well. Then Jay-Z's 444, which we'll get to later, kind of was the male perspective where he recognized he messed up with all that cheating and creeping and treating his wife like garbage. And this album is where both of those sides come together to celebrate black love, and I think that's done in a very, very well done way. So I talked about a few entries ago. Jay-Z, especially in the mid 2010s, early 2010s, he was trying to evolve as not just an artist, but as a man. And he kind of struggled to find that balance between being the relatable Jay-Z and being the human Jay-Z and being the mogul Jay-Z. And having all those come together and have less listeners be able to connect with. He was able to connect on this one, as he was with 444, but we'll get to that later. This album really was a great celebration of black love and parenthood, as we really got to see Jay-Z, the father and the husband, in a way we really hadn't seen it before. This album is really solid, and I know it got a lot of hype at the time because, surprise album, surprise Beyonce album, Beyond the hype, it might not be an album that gets a lot of headlines today, but on a technical aspect, as far as what it brings to the table, I think it's very well done. Pretty underrated album in both J and B's catalog. Coming in at number 8, In My Lifetime Volume 1, Jay-Z's sophomore album, and the album that seems to fall through the most cracks on social media. I've seen it getting a little bit more love recently, but man, for years and years, people act like this album didn't even exist or that it was some sort of failure. And people always pointed a finger at the Sunshine single with Foxy Brown and Babyface. I like the song, y'all. I don't know what to tell you. I thought the song was alright. It's kind of weird for a Jay-Z song. The song is dope. Regardless, let's talk about the project itself, which is very solid. Of course, it's nowhere near as good as its predecessor, and there are many albums that have, of course, overshadowed it. But for a project for what it is, I think a lot of Jay's late 90s albums get the short end of the stick, and we'll talk about another one that gets a big short end of the stick later on. But this album is very, very solid for what it is. Yeah, it's got that Puff and Lil' Kim song that sounds like two raccoons having a sword fight in a garbage can. But beyond that, that's the song you should complain about, not Sunshine. Beyond that, it's a great, great release. It does lean way more mainstream than Reasonable Doubt did for obvious reasons. Jay was trying to branch out and expand and kind of hit a new audience. But it doesn't stray from the Jay-Z of the 90s. That was very gritty. That was very cough up a long round from Marcy's son. He was very much still the Jay of that era, and he was able to reflect that here. Lyrically, he's sharp as a tack. He's gritty. He's got the production. You got Primo on the beats. There's just so much here to love, and when it comes to a balance of Jay-Z finding himself and the superstar that he will become, but still that original Jay-Z that this day one diehards remember, this is a great balance. Lots and lots and lots of these songs still hold up today. Lucky me, oh, I miss that Jay-Z. I miss that heart-tugging Jay-Z, and we don't get that enough in this day of bluster and braggadocio. So this album holds a special place, and I think it's pretty underrated overall. Coming in at number 7, and I know producer D Roth will be very excited. Watch the Throne, the collab with Kanye and Jay. This album, for what it's worth, is, along with Blueprint 3, is one of the albums that introduced a new generation of hip-hop fans to Jay-Z. And unlike Blueprint 3, which was not the best Jay-Z, this was a much better Jay-Z. Kanye, even saying the name makes me weary. But let's talk about the actual music and not the horrible human being right now. Kanye and Jay have extremely great charisma together. They just have so much chemistry, and that just shined through this project. And it really felt like Big Brother and Little Brother coming together to make magic. These are two artists, a titan of his era, lifting up a new legend on the rise, and they worked so well together. You got two different perspectives, and the beats are just immaculate. Still one of the better produced albums of Jay-Z's discography, and that's saying a lot. The only thing that it falls a bit short on is a little long in the tooth for me. I know that a lot of people consider this a top 5 Jay album and one of the best Kanye albums. And while it's good, it's not really great to me. And it doesn't hit that legendary status or that classic status. And while it does have some songs that many people would consider classics on it, as an overall project, it's a little long, could use a little bit of a trim, a little bit more cohesion, but I can't hate. This was a great project. There's a reason why people are still dying to hear Watch the Throne 2, but we probably won't because Kanye is spending too much time lying to y'all on Fox News. Have fun with that. I'm waiting for the excuses to come to defend that one. Y'all like, but man, if I made Watch the Throne, I'm going to make Watch the Throne 3, go on the street and kick a bunch of babies in the face. I hope you'd show me as much love, support, and undying blind passion as you do Kanye West. Why does every video I have to get to yelling about Kanye? D Roth, next entry, please. Blood pressure getting up. Coming in at number 6 is 444. Or you could call this Jay-Z's Redemption album. So, longtime Soul and Stereo fans might remember this. Around the early 2010s, I did a post where I named Jay-Z the best rapper alive. And I said alive because, you know, that dude back there is of all time. Anyway, and he reigned that for a while, but then, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it was kind of rocky times for your boy Hov in those early 2010s. And as Nas kind of began to like uphold himself as elder statesman, Jay started to flounder a bit in my eyes, and then I had to drop Jay down and put Nas as the best rapper alive and Jay is number 2. And, you know, of course, that got the whole historians were coming from my throat for that one. But doesn't mean that he isn't dope, because of course he is. And this album, 444, helped, in my eyes, kind of reestablish Jay-Z as the artist that we knew who he was. So we talked about earlier the Lemonade album and how it painted Jay-Z as a horrible idiot of a husband. And he readily admits all of that here on this album. But instead of taking shots or trying to diss his wife or making it into some weird battle or mixtape, instead of a response, he took it upon himself to recognize the flaws that he had and took this album to talk about manhood. And this was the first time that we heard a mature Jay kind of speaking to his audience as an adult. We heard it a little bit on the Magna Carta album. I think it went over people's heads because, I'm sorry, I have not had crepe Suzette in Brussels on a boat, so I don't know what you're talking about. But I can relate to a brother trying to be a good husband, or someone who is trying to help his community, or looking back at where he came from. These are the things that made 444 such a strong album. Production by No ID, my God, he was just on one. Jay was in the zone, and he really had something to say. The best albums, I keep telling y'all, are the ones that aren't just playlists with random songs. It's when an artist truly has a story to tell. Jay had that one here. One thing I'll push back on, because this is an album that many people have considered to be like a modern day classic. I don't know if I'll go that far. Clearly it's high on our list. I hold it in high regard. It's one of Jay's best albums. However, there's been this narrative that like this is the first adult hip hop album ever. Let me tell you, player, something. Like, there were grown people before 2017. There were many, many, many adult-leaning hip-hop albums. Y'all just weren't paying attention to them. Nas had a bunch. Common had a bunch. They've always been here. But yes, for an artist of Jay-Z's stature to speak about the things he was talking about was very important for the art form and very important for his career. This was a great, great way that you can see an artist stepping into maturity and breaking this narrative, this false narrative that hip-hop is only for kids. Hip-hop is for anybody who can tell a story, and we need more stories from wise brothers like this one. Great album. Coming in at number 5, and y'all gonna kill me, but it's cool. The Black Album. So, this is another album that is highly regarded as one of Jay-Z's best. And I would agree. That's why it's at number 5. But looking back, while this is a very, very, very good album, I think the legacy of the album is stronger than the actual content. And let me set the stage. So, in 2003, we learned that this was going to be Jay-Z's final album. He was retiring. He was hanging it up. This is going to be it. This is the last Jay-Z album we were ever going to have. And he was going to go out with a bang. And he did. He really went out with a bang. And because of that, because of the album theme of finality and just doing what you do and bowing out on top, that was the theme of the album. I think that's why it's so embraced as a body of work. And it's good. Some might even say it's great. But it doesn't reach the upper echelon for me because, quite frankly, I just felt like there were albums that did better stuff. And again, I don't want to shortchange how great this album is. An absolutely outstanding album that really has a great, dark, gritty theme to it that really works in an era that was still really blingy and shiny. And I know someone's going to bring up, well, Change Clothes was not dark and gritty. Like, of course not. It wasn't. But it worked for the context of the album. But to have this hip-hop titan that was going out on his own terms was, I mean, it was kind of unprecedented for its time. So seeing that and seeing him do that, I think people have said, okay, this was the last album we're going to get, therefore it's the best album we're going to get. It's a great album. just falls a little short because especially on the second half, there are a few songs that are kind of to me. There are a few that are But when it's good. And Jay-Z's retirement did not last long. But thankfully, this album's legacy still did. Coming in at number 4 is American Gangster. And I'm going to really shake the table and say that some of the love that y'all show the Black Album, y'all should be showing American Gangster. Let me tell you this. So this album may be named after the film that came out at the same time, but it's not really a soundtrack to that album. It's more an album inspired by that film. So this, in my opinion, was the last time and probably the final time we will ever get to see Reasonable Doubt Jay-Z. The mafioso Jay-Z. The threatening mob boss hustler Jay-Z. Like, he was able to recapture that persona from that era, and he did it so well. So well. And the production, my gosh, all of the chef's kisses. Because it was so soulful, yet gripping, and he was on the top of his game. The features here are incredible. This album, in my opinion, is absolutely one of his best. Yet also one of his most underrated because it just does not have the legacy that a Black Album has, or a 444, or it's one of those ones that kind of slid under the radar in 2007 as the climate of hip-hop was starting to change. We were starting to Lil Wayne and auto-tune ourselves into oblivion. So before that happened, we got this piece of work. If it came today, people would lose their absolute minds over it. People would be going crazy giving it 5 stars. But because everyone was shifting their focus, I think a lot of people missed what was going on here. To me, this was the last hurrah of the Jay-Z of old before he stepped into a new era, for better or worse. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But as an overall piece of work, my gosh, American Gangster, we gotta salute the homie for this one. Coming in at number 3, oh yes, I've been ready to fuss with y'all about this one. Volume 2, Hard Knock Life. So let me tell a little bit more of a history lesson, because you know that's what your boy loves to do. I know that some of these hip-hop historians here on Twitter, who've been listening to hip-hop about 3 years and don't know what they're talking about, have this idea that Jay-Z burst on the scene, immediately was the biggest rapper of all time, was selling a gazillion records and a gazillion things, and everything went #1, and he went and got quadruple platinum. That's not what happened, y'all. Jay-Z came out, and he was the equivalent of Freddie Gibbs. He was a very dope rapper. That's about it. That's it. He had a couple joints on the radio. That's about it. His album might have went gold. Okay, cool. He was not at all a headliner as far as the hip-hop world. But this album is the album that changed everything. And you can ask, and there have been debates for years, even on my site, Soul and Stereo, about why that happened. The absence of Big, the absence of Pop, the changing of the guard, so to speak. There's lots of reasons why Jay-Z became Jay-Z in this album, but this is the one that made him a mainstream star. And in my eyes, when it comes to the best mainstream Jay-Z album, this is probably the best mainstream Jay-Z album. It is hit from front to back. It really reflects its time. We'll get to more to that to it in a second. But it was the one where we really saw him step into his superstardom. There's a reason why even today it's still his best-selling album, one of his most notable singles, which really ain't even really one of my favorite songs because I got so tired of it. But to hear Jay-Z on the radio back to back in '98, it was almost kind of weird because you would hear Jay on the radio, but not like that. We did not hear him step into his greatness until this album. And I think it was because he just shed everything that was the kind of old Jay-Z persona with the mafioso stuff, as we talked about before, and he embraced more of the wealth and the shininess. And I mean, it was the shiny suit era. Thankfully he didn't put on a shiny suit. Thankfully, he didn't go that far. But he embraced the sounds that made that era, but he made them his own. And that's why he was able to come to the next level as an artist. Now, why have I given this album the coveted 5-star review when most people have come through my throat for saying that? Here's why, and here's why I think that it is so overlooked today. Well, let's talk about why it's overlooked. This album is very much a product of its era as opposed to a lot of the later Jay-Z albums. Remember I said earlier that later 90s Jay-Z doesn't really get a lot of attention. You hear Reasonable Doubt put up there. It's like this great album that a lot of young people haven't even heard. But most of the fandom seems to start at Blueprint and then go back from there. We'll get to those albums later. But that late 90s transition period is a period we don't really hear about. And it was very, very important for Jay's career because that's the period where he became legendary. And this is also the part where he was able to show how he could adapt to different production. He could do a double time over a Timbaland beat. He could do a Jermaine Dupri song. He could do all of these, and that showcased it on this album. He could hop on a Swiss beat and murder it. From top to bottom, I was going to say from top to bottom is flawless. That's not quite true because it's got that little, I was going to say Lil' Kim, but it's actually Foxy Brown who was doing her Lil' Kim impersonation at the time. Remember when she was trying to sound like Lil' Kim holding her nose or something? There are a couple of tracks up here that are a little suspect, but that's not enough to lower the score. Overall, from front to back, I think this is an airtight release. One of his best works, one of the best albums of the 90s, and easily one of the best albums of that era. That's why it gets the 5-star score. But I don't think that it gets the love that it appreciates today because it's late 90s. And late 90s doesn't get that sort of celebration. You don't hear a lot of people running around talking about those type of mainstream records from the late 90s. You hear it a little bit with DMX because unfortunately, we celebrate everybody once they're gone. But there's some really great records here that just don't get the love that they deserve. It's a great, great release. I implore you that if you're a Jay-Z fan and you haven't heard this album, please go hear this album. Give it another shot. It's worth it. To me, it's the best mainstream Jay-Z album to date. And the reason why it gets the coveted 5 stars from your boy. Even though a bunch of y'all probably gonna be mad. Too bad. Check it out. Coming in at number 2, yes, it is the Blueprint 1, one of the most celebrated hip-hop albums of all time. Now, when this dropped, there was a rumor that this was recorded in 7 days. I'm not sure if that was true or that's just Jay-Z trying to do his stupid God complex thing. Regardless, whatever worked that day. Jay was on another level. Remember what I said, and I have been saying that about late 90s going into the early 2000s. I really was kind of not falling out of love with Jay, but he had a couple albums back to back that I just thought were okay. And coming off of the 3 albums that I really loved, 2 that were I was kind of like, what is my Jay doing? Boy, he blew the doors off with this one and once again reestablished himself as one of the best in the game. This album to me is so great because of how cohesive the production is. There are different producers here, but it all sounds and flows like one singular project. The beats are just so soulful, but they knock when they need to knock. And yeah, every once in a while there's a annoying song here and there, like the I can't even remember. What's the weird song? Hola Jovito is okay. There are a couple of joints that are just okay. But let's look beyond perfection and look what really works here. From the album intro to the hidden track with the exercise and the Girls remix, easy for me to say, Girls remix. Those songs bookend what is from front to back some of Jay's most cohesive work. The production is wonderful. The lyrics, the wordplay and lyricism is just off the page. And when it comes to Jay-Z's legacy, it was cemented with this one. If you had any questions about Jay being GOAT worthy or GOAT level, that was smashed here. And I know we kind of, it has this legacy of being like, oh, this is an album that came out on 9/11 when the Twin Towers dropped, and they have these weird little comparisons there. Oh, they dropped Eye Rolls, whatever. Put that aside because, you know, that's just silly rap talk. We're talking about actual quality of content. Jay-Z was peak here. Wasn't his best, although it does also get the coveted 5-star review from your boy. There was one album even better. Yes, coming in at number 1, there was no doubt, Reasonable Doubt. So in 1996, I remember when this album dropped. I remember my friend saying, you know, I might go peep that Jay-Z album. I think it might be pretty good. There's a store called Camelot Music. He was like, I'm going to go down there and get it. I was like, cool. I went and got my own copy eventually. And boy, this album was something else. It was, at this point, my music collection was relatively new. Of course, I was just getting into CDs at this point, so I don't know, maybe I had like 10 or 11 or so. That album is still back there, and I should have pulled it up because that thing looks more scratched up than like Wolverine's scratching post. It is so scratched up because I took that album with me everywhere. It is such a formative part of my music years, and the reason why is because of the storytelling. I hadn't heard storytelling in an album that good since Nas, since Big. Those were two that had really taken that to another level, and that's when I really fell in love with the art form of hip-hop, the storytelling aspect. Jay was another one who just put it on top of that. And it had that, as we talked about earlier, the mafioso themes that were so prevalent in hip-hop at the time, but beyond the posturing. It was bigger than that. It was the wordplay. It was the way Jay was able to take scenarios and help paint these pictures in your mind. It's a technique that most rappers don't get today, and that's not an old head being an old head, because even old head rappers aren't able to do it in a way that Jay was able to do it here. This album is without question one of the best hip-hop albums of all time. Not just Jay's career, of all time. And that was because of how he was able to paint pictures with his words here on this release. Now, I know that as we talk and years later, we talk about the best Jay albums, and we often talk about how albums mean more when they are your entry point. So if you came on Jay-Z in 2009, you might think that Watch the Throne is the best Jay-Z album because that was the best album from the era when you came on. I'm blessed enough to say I was around before Jay-Z debuted. I was Jay-Z. When Jay-Z was AZ, I was around. So I was able to see his growth from beginning to end. I didn't have an entry point, so to speak, for Jay. But being able to sit back and objectively view his entire career from beginning to end, in my opinion, without question, his best work to date, because it's the one that not only made him, in my eyes, not mainstream eyes, because that would come later, in my eyes, one of the premier lyricists of his day, but most importantly, one of the premier storytellers in the history of hip-hop. It started with Reasonable Doubt, and it's still one of the greatest albums in the history of the game. 5 stars, of course. Of course it's 5 stars. Why would you even ask? One of the best ever from one of the best ever. And that's it, players. That is all of Jay-Z's albums ranked from bottom to top with a couple of exceptions. And now it's your turn. Hit up the comments and let me know. Are you mad that the Black Album isn't number 1? Are you mad that Volume 2 is too high? Are you mad that I just didn't throw out the Magna Carta album in the trash? I don't think it's bad, y'all. Give it another shot. This is your part where you get to yell at me. Go in the comments. Just act like you have a little bit of sense. A little bit of sense. Don't act like Kanye. Just like have a little bit of sense down there. But let's get the conversation going. Hope you enjoyed it. And as always, this edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions is a wrap. Play on, players. Where's the fuse box?
Don't even think about it.